Hi, welcome to Experiential Realism. Today I'm joined by Professor Richard Oxenberg. Richard has already appeared on the show before to discuss his Essential Foundation article on why evolutionary theory contradicts materialism. But today we're going to be discussing something more pressing in the world of American politics, namely what Christian conservatives think of the current president. And if there's time, we may touch upon theology and Christian existentialism. Without further ado, I give you Professor Richard Oxenberg. Hi,
Ah,
Richard. Welcome back to the show. Last time we talked about evolutionary theory and how it tends to go against materialist metaphysics. But this time we're going to be discussing American politics and mainly Donald Trump and how conservative evangelical Christians view the current president, and why is it that they don't seem to see anything wrong with Donald Trump as a person? They don't seem to see any blemishes, and some of them believe it was actually sent by God, um, to save the country from the terrible leftists. I mean, what's going on here? I mean, despite the fact that Donald Trump has expressed misogynistic views, he's also expressed, you know, views against, immigrants, and although they that they are only against illegal immigrants, but I don't know how they carry out the policy of getting rid of the illegals. But
yeah.
also, yeah, despite the bigotry and the misogynistic remarks in the past, and also, his divisive rhetoric and being affiliated with someone like Jeffrey Epstein, which maybe we'll touch upon later. Why is it that they don't see any blemishes on his personality? It's baffling.
Yeah. Well, that is certainly a good and a big question. Um, and I think that in a very general way, and to me, it goes without saying. It's almost obvious that Trump, quite deliberately and quite shamelessly, represents almost the diametric opposite of everything that Christ preached.
Yeah,
Um, I mean, Christ basically preached a spirit of humility, um, humility really even unto death, a humility unto the cross, and um, and Christ is very shamelessly a virtual complete egoist, right? I mean, his the sort of the iconic image of Trump, Trump rather, is a complete egoist. I meant to say. The Trump Tower with the big Trump name on it, and his tweets, which are constantly referring to how great and wonderful he is, and how everything he does is better than what anybody else does. Um,
there's definitely a
the
level of narcissism, that's for sure.
yeah, the narcissism is quite blatant, and I think undeniable. And in I mean, what do we mean by narcissism? The word narcissism, derived from the mythological figure Narcissus, who
Yeah,
looked at himself in a pond and fell in love with his own image,
that's
right?
right. Yeah.
And somebody who falls in love with his own image is exactly the opposite. It's the exact opposite of what Christ preaches, which is a
Yeah.
kind of selfless love, a love for the other, a love even for the enemy. Um, and this is the spirit that is authentic to Christianity, and it's pretty flagrant, I think, that Trump represents the opposite spirit.
Yeah.
Um, Jesus says the truth shall set you free, and Trump is one of the as a chronic, a pathological liar. It's almost sometimes you get the impression that he lies just for the hell of it,
Yeah.
just just out of the enjoyment of lying.
Yeah.
Um, Jesus says, on the cross, Jesus says, "Father, forgive them; they know not what they do." Whereas Trump seems to be motivated by almost endless vindictiveness in his policies. Trump is said that it's easier for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven. And Trump is certainly dedicated to the increase of his own personal wealth and to political policies that seem to be designed to make the wealthy as possible. Um, and just down the line, the level of corruption that we see in Trump's administration, the vitriol, the endless vitriol that gets expressed is if you had a circle and put Christ on one part of the circle, Donald Trump would be 180 degrees
Yeah.
in character, the opposite of Christ.
Yeah.
Um, so that then raises, this enormous question of what can possibly account for the fact that there are quite a lot of very dedicated people who see themselves as very dedicated to Christianity and to the teachings of Christ. What can possibly account for their celebration? I
Yeah.
mean, not simply support, not simply grudging support of Donald Trump, but a celebration and, as you put it, at times almost a kind of worshipful attitude toward Trump.
Yeah. It's baffling to me because um, a Christian well read in biblical verses will be aware of, say, for example, the book of Revelation. When you look at someone like Donald Trump, he seems to fit one of the antichrists foretold in the Bible, to a T. And he also, not to start connecting, you know, um, theological dots here or anything, but it almost seems like he has used the fact that he was wounded in an assassination attempt as evidence that God is on his side and is protecting him to save America. And when you read the book of Revelation, you immediately see that the beast um, suffers some kind of wound and then miraculously recovers and everyone praises the beast. It's something like that. I'm very rusty on biblical verses, but I remember reading something like that in the book of Revelation out of curiosity years ago. And when I reflect on what's happened in the last few years, and I see how is played the assassination attempt, the last one in Pennsylvania in particular, to his advantage, um, it's quite striking. It seems to fit the stories in the Book of Revelation. And to me, I mean, I'm an idealist, and I wouldn't say I'm a Christian or, I was born Catholic, but I'm not religious. I don't follow, I don't go to church or anything like that. Um, Mainly because I think people derive, in this day and age, literalist interpretations of the Bible, which don't make sense to me. I don't agree with. I think the Bible is more um, figurative, more metaphorical than anything else, right? But when I see what's been happening, and as an idealist and having experienced precognition myself, I sometimes wonder if John the Revelator and, whoever wrote the verses in the book of Revelation, if they had some kind of precognitive foresight, right? And to me, in idealist metaphysics, it makes perfect sense because I think that consciousness transcends space and time, and we can stumble upon future events, which has happened to me, and I've had it confirmed. And I wonder if something like that is going on in the Bible, but no one knows. Maybe it's a coincidence, right? But I think knowing all of this and being aware of biblical verses and prophecies, how is it that Christian conservatives don't see, the don't see the blemishes on his personality? Is it because they're trying to hold on to their religion? They're holding on to their traditions. They're scared of change, maybe, and they see Trump as a figure that can potentially preserve their belief. I mean, we've already seen that Donald Trump has overturned Roe v. Wade, for example, to do with pro-life and pro-choice abortion rights. And I'm wondering if he's pandering to the Christian right in order to get himself more votes. And I'm wondering what's the demographic in America? Is it mostly Christian conservatives or pro-lifers?
Well, no, and I don't think there's a major. I don't think a majority of people in the country are supporters of Donald Trump. We have an odd electoral system here where where a minority candidate can end up getting many more getting elected because of the way that the votes are distributed. Um, um, I I mean it's
Would
a
he still have
question.
one? Sorry, would he still have
What
one if not for that discrepancy in
in
the
in 2024 he won the popular vote.
right?
Um, so what that seemed to indicate is that more people voted for him than voted for Kamala Harris. And so in that respect, he seems to have won even then, which baffles me. But he won by a small margin, and he won also by through a lot of deception and lying.
Yeah,
Um, and there was something called Project 2025 that was created by allies of Trump, and a lot of people said that the Project 2025 is a very radically um, um, I don't even think the word conservative is appropriate. It's a radically rightist agenda for, in many ways, dismantling a lot of the protections that the
yeah,
government provides people. And and Trump denied again and again and again that he was associated with Project 25 or Project 2025 or that he was going to implement it. And then the moment he got into office, he began implementing it virtually point for
he did the
point for
opposite.
point for point. So this is a man who lies with complete abandon, and there's a weird way in which and I think this has something to where he gets his appeal from. There's a weird way in which his shamelessness, his total lack of, in some sense, concern for um, traditional standards or traditional norms is appealing to a lot of people
I
because
was going to say that, yeah, yeah, because I remember, just to cut you off briefly, I remember that just before he won the first time back in 2016, I remember that Trump was saying certain things which I think the American public wanted to hear. So, for example, maybe um, the left didn't get their message across properly, and maybe a lot of people were saying that the left were perhaps being too aggressive in shifting the Overton window. They were forcing diets on people, saying they had to be vegans. They said you have to use a certain kind of language. This is what's politically correct. And some people might think that that was perhaps too soon and too, not too soon, but perhaps too aggressive in the implementation of their more progressive views. And to someone who's more conservative, or someone not even too conservative, but someone of the old left, how the left used to be, right? As they shifted the Overton window and aggressively said to the liberals, aggressively said to the old left, if you don't get on board with us, you're just going to be labeled a bigot, right? And that perhaps didn't sit well with a lot of people, the way they went about delivering their message. And I remember at the time that Trump was saying what people wanted to hear, not necessarily what's right, the right kind of advice, but he was defending coal miners, the coal industry. He was saying that climate change was a hoax. He was saying that, if you use whatever language you want to use. He was also saying you can eat burgers if you want to eat burgers. You don't have to do what other people tell you to do. And I think the American public were hungry for this. And on top of that, right around the time of several terrorist attacks, and in particular, uh, not just in America but also in London, we had the 7/7 attacks, and and then 9/11 kept being mentioned, and you know, obviously it was the Salafists were behind this, and they claimed to be the real Muslims. So Trump turned around, and especially in America, 9/11 was still sore, wasn't it? Back in 2016. And Trump turned around, and I remember him being on stage with Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama, and he turned around and uh, and he pointed at them, and he said to the crowd, "You see, these two, they can't even name the evil. They're suffering from the Voldemort effect, and the evil that we're facing is Islamic terrorism." And I think a lot of Americans were hungry to hear that, right? And they bought into that rhetoric. So it's almost like this con man came in. He pointed out all the flaws in the other side of the political spectrum. He pointed out the flaws in what the liberals were saying, the Democrats, sorry, in what the Democrats were saying. And he said, look, see, I promise change. I promise change, which is, I think, what people wanted, really, because let's face it, both sides are not perfect. And sometimes I think
So
it's,
that's it. Yeah.
yeah,
So, um, so see, let's see if maybe we can take this a step deeper, right? Because I think that what you're saying, and I think it's quite true, is that there's a deep sense of dissatisfaction among the population
yeah,
that Trump was able to tap into, right? There's a deep sense of anxiety, dissatisfaction, a lot of maybe suppressed anger
yeah,
that Trump then gave people permission to vent and express, and um, and a sense of things being maybe somewhat chaotic, um, and a deep sense of lack of homeness is one way that I would put it. Trump's phrase "Make America Great Again"
yeah,
is a an appeal to some vague, romantic, really, memory of a time when things were more stable, when everybody sort of looked the same, when there wasn't all this diversity and cultural multiculturalism,
yeah.
and and times were somehow more simple, and men were men and women were women and children were children and heterosexuals were heterosexuals, and it was
Everything was mapped out.
an appeal, right, an appeal to a time when things were more clear cut,
Yeah,
and what allows you to appeal to something like that, I think, is a deep sense of of anxiety, a
yeah,
deep sense of not being grounded in anything that is that that is really supporting you, that is giving you a sense of home, a sense of being where you are. And I think that is something that that is endemic to American society in many ways. Um, and it's partly due, or maybe even largely due, to the emphasis on, and we have what I would call a very appetitive society. We have a society that is constantly um, oriented toward the satisfaction of our appetites, of our individual desires, of what it is we want. We are bombarded all the time by advertisements that are trying to seduce us into resolving or satisfying our our emotional needs really through the consumption of consumer goods.
Yeah.
Um, we have a highly agonistic society, a highly competitive society. Um, I mean, in some ways, competition can be good, but on the other hand, if you're living in a world in which you are constantly feeling that you are in danger of being shut out or losing your job um, uh, or not having enough, then you're just living in this constant state of insecurity. Um, and and I think that Trump was able to somehow appeal to all of that. And a lot of it, I think, is undefined. Now, people
Yeah.
don't have a clear sense of what it is that is distressing them. They
Yeah.
just know that they are under stress, right? And then somebody rises up and says, well, here's why you are feeling so distressed. These illegal immigrants have
Yeah.
invaded our country. And I mean,
Yeah.
this is just classical scapegoating. They're doing these terrible things. And if we could somehow get rid of them, then everything would somehow come back to normal. And I think that a lot of what happens is that I'm not even sure people buy that. Or that I'm not even sure the people who who sign on for that do it because they are actually persuaded that expelling all these immigrants will somehow make the country better. I think people sign on to it because they need somewhere to target their anger and distress. And so you give them some other to target it on,
Yeah.
and that allows for a sense of release,
Yeah.
not both relief and release. You can release all that tension, all that anger, all that all that distress by targeting it
Yeah.
on
Through
some
propaganda.
group,
That's right. Yeah.
right? And so you've got the illegal immigrants, you've got the libtards,
Yeah. Yeah.
you've got the
All these terms that are coined. Yeah. The
right,
libtards. Yeah.
the
That's right. Yeah.
Muslims and so forth.
Yeah.
And so I think that's all a big part of it.
There's definitely
Um,
a divide between right and left, and name calling. There's definitely a lot of name calling. The liberals will say about the conservatives, you are, um, what's the word? You're bigots, you're dinosaurs, you're living in the past. Uh, get with the program. The world's moving on. We're more progressive, and then from the conservatives, they're saying about the liberals, well, you've gone mad. You're destroying meaning. You're destroying everything that we hold dear. You're saying that all our traditions are wrong, that there's nothing good to preserve. And I think, yeah, I think Donald Trump definitely tapped into that. Along comes a con man. He sees everything that's wrong with his opponents. He found a way, not even opponents. I would say that he He just found a way uh, to rise to absolute power, or what he thought would be absolute power. And now he still has his rivals in the Oval Office, but basically is abusing power. And there is a sense. So at the time when I saw everything playing out, I said to my wife, you know what? I think Trump's going to win because he seems to be saying what the American people want to hear. And
Well,
then
not all of them.
right,
Certainly not all of them. I mean, Trump managed to get barely over 50% of the electorate voting for him in
yeah,
2024,
I
which
see.
by the way is just astonishing to me that
I,
and
something. I sometimes think that the Democrats don't pick the best candidates.
well,
Um,
that's part of it too. The
yeah,
Democrats, there's a whole other story. I felt for a very long time
yeah,
that the Democrats um, have been extremely poor at articulating a clear ideology.
yeah,
And nature abhors a vacuum. So if there's no ideology on the part of the Democrats, but there's an ideology, a very clear ideology on the part of the Republicans. I
yeah,
mean, one of the things about the Republicans is they know what they're about in a way that the Democrats don't quite. Um, and one of the reasons for that, I think, is that the Democrats they don't know quite how to define themselves. Um, I felt for a long time
yeah,
that the ideology of the Democrats um, is and should be what I think comes to be called social democracy.
yeah,
And to define social democracy refers to a political and economic system. A social democratic system would be a political or economic system that that employs the free market, employs capitalism,
yeah,
but recognizes that any economic system need to be judged. The merit of any economic system needs to be judged by the way in which it benefits the society as a whole, right? Um, and um, and that notion can be distinguished from what might be called libertarian capitalism, which is a capitalist uh, ideology based upon the notion that everybody has an individual right to amass as much wealth that they possibly can, regardless, in some sense, regardless of whether or not it is to the benefit of the society as a whole. So
yeah,
that's a clear divide to me between right and left. And what the Democrats need to do now, the Republicans have been extremely uh, successful at 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 putting forth something they called supply side economics, with the idea in mind that somehow if you make the economy such that wealthy people can get wealthier and wealthier, that is going to contribute to the welfare of everyone.
yeah,
I think that has been shown to be demonstrably untrue. Um, and and what the Democrats, I think, have failed to do very effectively is to
yeah,
lay out an ideological vision for
yeah,
how the society should be run. Um, it's not simply a matter, and to lay out that vision on the grounds that this is the way in which societal justice is realized.
yeah,
It's not simply that we believe in being nice to people,
yeah,
right? It's that an economic system is an interdependent system. It requires that all these pieces work together. Nobody becomes a billionaire
no. I
through their
sometimes think I do remember Bernie Sanders. I haven't followed his political views, since he ran as a presidential candidate. But I do remember him taking small donations, which I think nobody had done for a long time in America. And he was taking small donations and also voicing the concerns and opinions of the majority, the lower classes, the working classes, the middle classes. Um, it's something that he said. But yeah, he was taking small donations and he had a more socialist view. Um, and he was concerned with distribution or something like that, but he never quite made it. So I'm wondering if Bernie Sanders would have been a better president instead of I could be wrong because I'm not American. I don't live there, so I don't know exactly what's going on. But I do think that whoever faces Donald Trump, he finds a way to criticize them for things that he himself has done. For example, when he was against Hillary Clinton, he found plenty of ammunition against the Clintons. He was able to point out that Bill Clinton was an abuser of power. He was after all impeached, wasn't he? And also he abused several women while he was in office. There's several women. There are reasons to believe that he might have raped several women because of the accounts are very similar, and also in order to divert the attention away from him at the time, he started wars abroad, didn't he? He started wars in Iraq and I think he blew up a it was a pharmaceutical
I don't
company
believe
in
Bill.
Sudan. Yeah,
I don't believe Bill Clinton started a war in Iraq.
right.
And the war in Iraq was started by um, George W. Bush
Right, yeah,
after
yeah, yeah. I
9/11.
think, yeah, I think he made the decision to
There was,
to to to
yeah,
uh, to bomb.
but
Yeah, he made the decision to bomb Baghdad at the time. I think the yeah, you're right. You're absolutely right because it precedes the war in Iraq precedes Bill Clinton, doesn't
yeah,
it?
I mean, this is
Yeah,
well, the war in Iraq. Yeah, now we're getting sort of bogged down in some
yeah.
detail.
But
I'm not
anyway,
sort of
Donald Trump was able to tap into all his mistakes and
well,
his
Donald Trump was able to tap into a
yeah,
tremendous amount of insecurity and frustration and anxiety in
yeah,
the society. And as you were talking, it occurred to me, and maybe we can sort of move from this point. I think there's a
yeah.
common ground.
Right.
There's actually a common interest on both the right and the left, a common need that is being expressed on both sides, although the way in which they're trying to satisfy that need
Yeah,
differs quite a lot. And we might almost call it a need for belonging.
yeah,
I mean, if we're going to try and look at the spirituality of all of this, my area is philosophy of religion.
yeah,
And so I'm interested in the way in which we can think of this, how this is related to spirituality, and how that also then is related to this weird perversion of
yeah,
Christianity that we are seeing through the Trump phenomenon. Um, at a very fundamental level for human beings, I think there is what we might think of as a need for belonging. The need for belonging has its roots in our ontological, here's a big word, our ontological contingency, right?
yeah.
We are
We're
not,
used to that word
we
here.
are not,
Yeah,
what's that?
we're used to that word here because
Yeah, okay.
we talk about epistemological idealism and ontological idealism. So yeah, yeah, the audience is already aware. So yeah,
Right. So, so human beings are ontologically contingent beings. That is to say, we depend for our being and our well-being on the way in which we can establish relationships with that which is other than us, right? That's what it means to be contingent. And given that, there's a basic drive for trying to somehow order the world in such a way that you can be in a relationship with the world of otherness, um, that will support your own the integrity of your own being. Um, and here's where, as I say, it seemed to me the right and the left are looking for the same thing, right? On the way that desire for belonging plays itself out on the left is that a great many people who have traditionally been excluded and marginalized and not allowed to belong, um, have on the left stood up and began to assert their rights. And we've been seeing this now for many decades. So we have the civil rights movement, in which Black people who were excluded and not permitted to have full-fledged belongingness to the society rose up. We saw it in Martin Luther King and the whole movement toward integration and against segregation. And what was segregation but a way of saying you don't belong,
Yeah.
right? And so we have the civil rights movement. We have the women's rights movement on the left. We have the gay rights movement, which has now morphed into the LGBTQ plus movement.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Um, and uh, and um, and even the embrace to some extent of illegal immigrants is all part of this desire on the part of the left to have a society in which everybody can feel like they belong, right?
Yeah,
In
that's
which
right. Yeah.
everybody can feel that they are a full-fledged, accepted, and affirmed member of the society. So
Yeah.
that's kind of the vision, um, and it tends to get expressed, however, in an agonistic way. In other words, um, it's it would be better, I think. We can get into this for the left to speak of the responsibility of people to be accepting of others
Yeah.
than to speak of the right of others to be respected.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and,
Yeah.
and and the reason for that
That's a great
has to
point.
do
Yeah.
with the with the whole way in which the assertion of individual rights becomes, I'm going to use the word agonistic again. In other words, it is competitive. I have this right, you have that
Yeah.
right. Our rights are somehow clashing with one another.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is how this need for belonging, I think, plays itself out on the left, on the political left. And there is that same need for belonging because this is fundamental to human beings. We have the same need for belonging on the right. But the way it's playing itself out on the right is by trying to exclude those factors in society that feel alien. In
Yeah.
other words, if you can say to yourself, the reason that society no longer feels like a place where I belong is because every time I walk out on the street, I'm seeing all these people who are alien to me, who are speaking a different language, who have a different skin color, who
Yeah.
have a different accent, who have a different sexual orientation, who um, who don't subscribe to the values and the norms that I grew up with.
Yeah.
And that gives me this feeling of being in a society in which I can't count on belonging. I'm not in communion with these people.
Right.
And so And so the way to then address that need for belonging is through a kind of exclusion. Let's get rid of them.
Yeah.
Let's, let's in some sense force those people who we can't get rid of to live in accordance with these more traditional norms that make us feel more comfortable,
Yeah.
right? And let's get rid of those people who we can get rid of, namely the immigrants, the illegal immigrants.
Yeah.
Um, and then we will have a society in which we can feel comfort, comfortable again.
It should be an
Um,
all-inclusive society, really, which welcomes all. Um, I mean, I think, we've had some problems here in Britain too, where people have complained about the term multiculturalism because they've made the argument that Britain has one culture and that foreigners that come into the country should assimilate, which includes our laws and how we deal with certain things. Because, n- not too long ago, we've had a few cases, and it continues, where some people were carrying out honor killings and they were demanding their own courts here in Britain. So, the government allowed for some Sharia law courts here in Britain, which I think didn't sit well with a lot of people because people said if you come into this country, you should abide by British law, which means that you can't carry out honor killings, and and it seems like the system has allowed for that community to have their own court system where some of these individuals have been protected and even allowed to flee the country. And I think it clashed with the population. And somewhat, there's a guy called Konstantin Kissin. He runs a podcast called Trigonometry, and he said perhaps we shouldn't have called multiculturalism, which I think it was a word that started being used by Tony Blair back in the day. He was a Labour leader, wasn't he? And Konstantin Kissin said perhaps we should call it a multi-ethnic society, which means it welcomes all ethnicities. But if you move into Britain, you should abide by the laws of this country and try to assimilate. I mean, what do you think of that? Or is that something that could be implemented in America
I
as a a nascent solution before it progresses into people adopting a mentality that's more welcoming to other views and other traditions, as long as everyone follows the same laws in each state of America? Um, because people have
yes.
said the
Well,
left has been too aggressive and tried to shift the Overton window too quickly. I mean, what do you think? Maybe it's an issue of time as well, in part. I don't know. Maybe I'm
yeah.
throwing out too many things, but yeah, go for it.
No, 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 no. I think you're making a really interesting and important point. Um, and I think it comes down to trying to understand the fundamentals of the society that we live in. The United States, and I'm more familiar with the basic. I mean, Britain, of course, has itself gone through a great deal of transition
Yeah,
from its early history, right?
yeah,
So it does not have the same political system that it had 500 years ago.
true.
Um, so there's a lot of things that have shifted. Um, so, but in a way, that makes it a little easier to talk about the United States
Yeah,
because the United States is founded upon very explicitly stated principles, right? In the Declaration of Independence, which is in essence the founding document of the United States. Um, the creed of the United States
yeah,
is expressed in one of the most eloquent sentences I think ever written,
Yeah.
right? We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. There's the whole thing right there.
Yeah.
Um, what I think is missing in the United States at this point, and has been missing for a long time, is education about those fundamental principles.
Yeah.
Um, I think that that is, once again, I teach philosophy. Um, that statement is a highly philosophical statement. To truly analyze all its features would require a lot of philosophical reflection.
Yeah.
And it's rooted in a philosophical tradition, the tradition of and the Enlightenment tradition. Um, and that's the credo of the United States. And I do believe that that our country would be so much better off if everyone in this country were deeply versed in that in those ideas. The notion that everyone is equally endowed or equally has an equal right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness,
Yeah.
right? I mean, that actually opens the door to, that's the foundation of LGBTQ rights. I mean,
Yeah.
that's the political foundation. I mean, because this is the way these people are pursuing their happiness.
Yeah.
Um, um, and and so I think that if we could get people on both the right and the left to fully embrace this idea,
Yeah.
um, it would create some sort of common ground for us to discuss things. I mean, as far as something like honor killing,
Yeah.
the question, I guess what I'm saying is that I don't see it as a problem for a nation, whether it be the United States or Britain, um, to say this is these are our ethical and political commitments.
Yeah.
And if you come to our country, you are buying into these fundamental commitments,
Yeah.
which is not to say that you can't now engage in the political process
Yeah.
and try to persuade people to change some of those commitments.
Absolutely.
That's
Yeah.
certainly part of what you can do.
Yeah.
Um, but no, I agree with you. Maybe multi-ethnicism is a better term than multiculturalism. If what
Yeah.
we mean by multiculturalism is anything goes, and there is no longer a common a common foundation
Yeah.
to our cultural commitments.
Yeah. Because unfortunately, every time culture, the word culture gets mentioned, people get really defensive. They say, I grew up in this culture, it's who I am as a person. And I feel like, yeah, and they tend to say, I feel like people who don't respect my culture and do their own thing in my own country, they shouldn't be here, or they're against me, or, they're offending me. I think perhaps um, the solution is I can't even say this, multi-ethnicity, um, but then cultures should still be allowed to be practiced, but in the privacy of people's homes, maybe, but not in public if they happen to be in a country that um, doesn't. But then again, all cultures are supposed to be good, right, in their own way, unless, of
Well, I
course,
mean, you use the example of honor killings. So to me, that that's
that's
something that goes out beyond
Yeah,
um, the mere expression of a culture.
yeah.
Um,
There should
you
be a
know,
line
I mean,
drawn
it's
to certain things. Yeah, definitely. I mean, um, so in a way, if there is a group of people that condones honor killing, uh, then we have a problem with those people, don't we? And we can't really say that where they are from, if they were to perpetrate honor killing in their countries, we can't really say that that would be right just because they've moved back to their homeland, and
right. I mean, not
not to say
everything that
that
a
that
culture, not
country,
everything that
yeah,
right, not everything done in a culture is morally acceptable.
yeah, that's right,
And that's yet another problem that I think I that we find on the left, which is a kind of paradox of the left.
yeah,
The paradox being that on the one hand, the left tends to be very suspicious of or rejecting of the notion that there can be universal foundational moral claims,
yeah,
right? And so that gives rise to this idea of moral relativism.
yeah,
But the problem with moral relativism, if what moral relativism implies is that everyone should respect everyone else's culture or everyone else's
yeah,
morality, then it contradicts itself.
yeah,
Because the moment you say that everyone should do anything,
yeah.
you're no longer making a relativistic claim,
Yeah,
right? So,
it's almost like everyone's treading on eggshells. It's like no one culture can be better than the next. We all have to respect each other's views because everyone's got their own truth, and there's no there's no arbiter of right and wrong ultimately, because we have our own views, because our own moral views are social constructs that we uphold in our society, and we should respect other societies that uphold different moral views, let's say.
right,
And
well,
and
so,
and
but the moment, yeah, but the
yeah,
moment you say that we should respect other societies,
yeah,
um, and the moment you say that everybody should respect other societies,
yeah.
you're now making a universal claim, not a relativistic claim.
That's right. Yeah.
You're,
So
you're,
in a
you're
way, it's contradictory. It's
It's
self-contradicted.
contradictory, right?
Yeah.
It's contradictory. I mean, because a true relativist has to also affirm those people who reject other people's cultures,
That's right.
because
Yeah.
that's their it's my culture to reject your culture. So therefore, if you're a relativist, then I'm right to reject your culture because I'm right from my point of view.
Yeah.
Um, and so the notion, so relativism very often involves a confusion
Yeah.
of a kind of belief in universal acceptance, which
Yeah.
is not a relativistic position, it's a universalistic position.
Yeah.
And you confuse that with relativism. But now, if you recognize that,
Yeah.
and if you are willing to say to yourself, well, I believe in that people ought to be respectful of others, that is a universal
Yeah.
value that everyone ought to subscribe to. Once you lay that down as a foundation,
Yeah.
then you can build on that foundation.
Yeah. When it comes
And
to
you can,
morality, I do lean more towards universalism than moral relativism. It never sat well with me, even though I grew up, I'd say from my 20s onwards, I saw postmodernism rearing its head, and or its many heads, and some of its heads were quite ugly, and not just in terms of moral relativism, but also in art, for example, because I went into art and illustration, and it all became very subjective all of a sudden, because I've always been taught that since college. I had a very good teacher, and he always told me that art is a subliminal form of expression. But then that suddenly was lost the older I got, because people began to just do anything, just create any rubbish and then call it art, and then try to argue as to why it's art. And I remember going to the Tate Modern once and seeing uh, a bed covered with condoms, and it was displayed as art. And I thought to myself, how is this art? I mean, you see what I mean? In my mind, art's supposed to be more refined, and then obviously it clashed with other people's views of what art should be. But yeah, since college, there was a tension already visible, and it precedes the woke movement, for example. I went to college in the 90s, in the late 90s, and one of my teachers actually said, he said to me, "Let me show you a file," because we were actually very close. And he said to me, "Let me show you something, but you promise not to tell anyone." And he showed me something which was relevant to the politics of the college. And he showed me a file with numbers, and he said to me, "Look, we're supposed to have a certain number of black people, a certain number of white people, a certain number of Asian people. Everything has to be the same, so that when inspectors come, they see that there's no evidence of discrimination or racism, you know." And it made me think, and at the time I thought, um, well, that's just going by appearances. That's not going by any tangible evidence of the reality, you know, because if you're just looking at numbers, you know, one year it could happen that you have more white applicants, the next year it could happen that you have more black applicants. Why not just go along with the reality? Why not just let events flow? And it doesn't matter if we have, you know, more of one demographic over another. But then his concern was that they had to do that for appearances because it could be construed as evidence of discrimination. And it makes me think that maybe uh, the conservatives in America, I know that happened here years ago and it carries on, but it makes me think that one point that conservatives have made is that um, the left tended to go by, you know, equality of outcome instead of equality of opportunity. You know, so they make
Mhm.
that distinction, don't they? And they say, well, that seems to be a bit unfair. And in the end, the progressives make a kind of discrimination based on appearances. You know, they go against reality in a way, the playing out of reality, and reality just tends to fluctuate. Whereas they want to see everything on the same level, expressing uh, equality, what can be construed as everyone's the same, you know, the equity, you know, there's no evidence of discrimination here. Everything happens as it should, even though it could be that you get different applicants of different demographics each year. You know,
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, this all gets into some very complicated areas,
yeah,
uh, because the question then becomes, how do you measure equality of opportunity?
yeah,
Um, and uh, and one of the ways of measuring equality of opportunity, I mean, if you assume that different racial groups, for instance, are if you have large enough numbers of them, that they are basically going to be equal
yeah,
in their abilities and in their interest, then it does seem to follow from that if everyone has equal opportunity, they will also have statistically similar outcomes.
yeah,
And if they don't have statistically similar outcomes, you then have to look into the question.
Yeah.
Why is that? Why consistently does this group of people
Yeah.
not not succeed? What is the barrier that's standing in their way? And wouldn't take a long time to realize that, for instance, um, uh, people in the United States, the local schools, public
Yeah.
schools, are financed by property taxes largely. And so people who live in areas where the property taxes are high will tend to have better schools, more well-funded schools
Yeah.
than people who live in areas where the property taxes are low. And so the more depressed areas
Yeah.
will not have the same level of education
Yeah.
as the wealthier areas. And of course, education has a great deal to do with the kind of opportunities that are
Yeah.
created. But if there's some way that we could, and it's so difficult under the circumstances because there's
Yeah.
just so much strife at this point in this society.
Yeah.
But
And there's still a sense in which apartheid prevails in America, isn't there? Because in some areas of America, you get predominantly white people. In
well,
another area, you get predominantly a black community, and there's still a sense of distrust and resentment because of what's happened in the past to do with slavery, the Jim Crow era, and how black people used to be treated. And even today, that there's still, I remember in the 90s they were having debates about reparations. I remember Christopher Hitchens was on the side of reparations being made for black people because their ancestors suffered so much, and they continue to be discriminated against. So racism is a big thing in America, isn't it? A big a big problem, and it got passed down from generation to generation, where um, you know people complain, right, that for example, the majority of prisoners are black in America. I think this, as the statistics go, but then again, someone made an argument that perhaps it's because all this resentment got passed down the generations, and black people in America, African Americans, became very distrusting of uh, white police officers, and they used to be
there's that.
predominantly
I mean,
white.
there's that. There's almost no question that there's that a black person in America is going to have a harder time with the police.
Yeah,
Um, and it's not just a question of black people being distrusting of the police; it's the police being distrusting
of
of
black
the
people. Yeah, it works both ways,
you know.
doesn't it?
Um, but that is also related to poverty. Uh, I mean, there's always
Yeah.
I think there's always going to be more crime
Is
in
there a sense?
impoverished.
Yeah,
What's
sorry. Is
that?
there a sense that it's prevalent in America that um, black people of the older generations told their youngsters, the new generation in their black communities, don't trust the police, especially if they're white, because of what they've done before, and because of that, um, black youths tend to embrace gangs, and perhaps they get influenced. Is there a sense that that might be true, which could happen to any demographic? I'm not saying it's just a problem of the black community, but could that exacerbate the problem in America, where it perpetuates itself? And I'm not saying all black communities, obviously. I think it's supposed to be really bad in Chicago, I heard, but then again, in other areas, um, poverty, I suppose, plays a role, doesn't it? It's not
Oh,
just.
poverty plays an enormous role. I mean,
Yeah,
plays the major role, and it's all and that's pretty basic, right? If you have the material things that you need and want, then the likelihood that you're going to go out and commit crimes in order to get them,
yeah,
goes way down.
yeah,
Um, and And no, I don't think that the distrust of police on the part of Black people is largely due to the way that generations have been taught to distrust the white police. I think that it's due to the fact that the Black communities have suffered a great deal of abuse
Yeah.
from white police officers.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, I'm a white person, so I don't have a firsthand experience of this.
Yeah.
But I myself, I mean, I've got an imagination. If I were a Black person in the United States, especially if I were a poorer Black person, um, riding down the street and a white cop were to stop me, um, I can see how I would be
Terrified.
extremely frightened of what might happen.
Yeah.
Whereas, as a white person, white middle class guy, um, if a policeman stops me on the street, in the car, because I'm driving too fast or something,
Yeah.
it's not a big deal. I have every expectation that the worst thing that's going to happen is I'll get a speeding ticket.
Yeah.
Um, but I don't imagine that I'm going to be terribly abused or that I'm going to be suspected of having committed crimes or, I haven't had that experience with the police.
Yeah.
So I think that distrust comes from the way that these communities have been treated. Um, that said, it goes both ways, I
Yeah.
think. I think that the police are perhaps legitimately concerned about violence against themselves,
Yeah.
and if they're doing their police work in areas that are known to be high violence areas,
Yeah.
they're naturally going to be more on guard.
Yeah.
So it's, these things feed on one another. Um, I guess what I'd like to say, though, in a very overall sense, I mean, right now we are here in America, we are deeply, deeply polarized. And it's almost, and part of the problem, again, is Donald Trump, who
Yeah.
is not he is not a responsible uh, representative of any political or moral position. That's one of the main problems.
Yeah.
There's no talking to Donald Trump, and there's hardly any talking to anybody who supports him, or anybody who emulates him, or anybody who thinks well of him, because he's a deeply dishonest person. And we are never going to be able to resolve these kinds of societal problems without some sort of honesty,
Yeah.
without people being able to honestly say, here's how I feel. And the person on the other side saying, well, here's how I feel. And 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 being able to have that kind of open-hearted, respectful exchange
Yeah.
of ideas. Um, that's what's absolutely necessary. And it's the problem with that is that it requires you need it on both sides. You can't have it won't work if only one side is respectful and the other side is not.
They have
You
to meet
can't
in the middle
impose,
somehow, don't they?
right. I mean,
Yeah.
you need to have a desire for respectful and honest discourse on both sides.
Yeah.
And then once you have that, you can begin to, first of all, analyze the political situation with care, get clear about what your actual commitments are, um, and negotiate
Yeah.
and arrive at, because everybody's not going to ultimately agree, even when they're all honest, and
Yeah.
even when they're all respectful, and
Yeah.
even when they all understand what their commitments are. But then at that point, there can be some honest
Yeah.
negotiation.
And it's funny
But
because people, yeah, yeah, go for it. I was going to
all of
say,
this,
it's funny because
all
people,
of this
even
has
within the
broken
same
down.
political camp, people can disagree with one another. Leftists can disagree with other leftists on certain policies and views, and the same with the right. So it's like, why can't people just meet in the middle, converge,
But it's
honest
not even a
discussion, like you
question of
said?
meeting in the middle, right?
Yeah,
The answer, the reason people aren't meeting in the middle right now is because they have no place to meet, right? In order to meet in the middle, you have to be on the same plateau,
yeah,
and then you get to the middle of it.
yeah,
Um, but right now, there is no plateau. And that's because the plateau, as I'm saying, is honesty. I mean, there just can be no solution to differences without without each side being committed to honestly expressing their own views and honestly reporting on their own experiences and their understanding. Without honesty, all you have are people trying to get the better of one another. And that is just going to be a kind of warlike exchanges, where there's no resolution except to see who outpowers the other one, who is better at lying, who is craftier, who is sneakier, who is shiftier, and who can outpower the other. And the other then, who is outpowered, will then try and come back, um, uh, in a in an agonistic way. So that's where we are right now in the society.
and it's funny you mentioned Trump earlier because there's a huge power discrepancy between, say, an average Joe of the black community who gets pulled over by the police and is questioned solely for being, darker skinned, and he might be acting suspiciously, and he might be arrested just because he, on the basis of arguing back with the police, let's say, someone who loses their cool and it's like, what are you doing? Why have you stopped me? And then someone like Donald Trump, for example, who's a white president, and I forget how many infractions and heinous crimes he's been accused of, and he's managed to get away with it. And it makes me think, has he even pardoned himself? Like once he was elected for the second time. What's going
Yeah,
on
he
there?
hasn't he hasn't yet pardoned himself, and I'm hoping that the Supreme Court will be will be intelligent enough, I suppose,
Yeah,
to recognize that the pardon power extended to the president in the Constitution was obviously not intended to be used by the president to pardon himself,
yeah,
because that would put the president above the law. I mean, there are just so many things that have gone wrong here.
yeah,
Um, the decision on the part of the Supreme Court, um, to grant the president immunity, was a terrible decision. Um, very poorly It was very poorly thought through. It was very poorly argued for, and it has terrible consequences, especially when you've got like somebody like Donald Trump
yeah,
in office who will take advantage of it.
yeah,
Um, uh, so, uh, so there's just a lot of breakdown, a lot of breakdown in fundamental values, and I would say that breakdown, um, exist not only on the right, but to some degree on the left as well,
Yeah.
to the extent that the left is not able to sit back and view with some empathy and respect some of the frustrations and grievances that get expressed on the right. Um, I mean, there needs to be, it is, I believe strongly in LGBTQ rights.
Yeah.
I also recognize that that the normalization of transgenderism, for instance, um, upsets upsets traditional ways of life, and that some people will be threatened by that, and some people will have a hard time wondering, will begin to feel that might lead to even unpredictable problems
Yeah.
is understandable.
Yeah.
It's understandable.
Yeah.
And so it's not enough merely to say we should force everybody to respect these rights.
Yeah.
There also needs to be some sensitivity to
Yeah.
the fact that the radical change in norms is disruptive to people, and that sense of disruption and that sense of anxiety that comes from that, I believe, needs to be respected.
Yeah.
um, and and I mean, the way out of this, if we're ever going to get out of it, is to have people on all sides of the political spectrum um, embrace a, a commitment to respect of
Yeah,
the
because
of the concerns and interests of the other side.
that's right. Because I mean, we should be understanding of how people feel and, who they say they are, who they feel they are inside. And if nature is a certain way that people, you know, when it comes to gay people, for example, if they feel a certain way about their sexual orientation, we should accommodate that and feel respectful. As long as adults are having consensual sex, then it doesn't matter if someone's gay. And at the same time, with trans people, um, you know, if some individuals identify with a particular gender because of how they feel inside, regardless of the sex they were born with, then that's what nature produces. It produces human beings of a kind of diversity that we should all try to understand and also respect. And unfortunately, we're arguing about those uh, differences between human beings, and yes, we might get a sense that a particular group of people, when they're demanding rights, it might clash with the rights of other people. It might seem that way. Like, for example, with the feminist movement and the trans movement, there seems to be a clash there. But I think it's because I think both sides are trying to argue over the other, and they're not uh, coming to an agreement, some kind of consensus about reality. Just take a look at what nature has produced and how people feel about themselves, and just be respectful. I mean, there must be some kind of um, some kind of what's the word? Some kind of balance there that's conducive to the well-being of everyone. where everyone is respected and not denied, where people's identities are not denied, you know. And I don't understand why one side has to demonize the other and
Yeah.
their existence, you know. Oh, you're wrong, or you're in need of salvation if you're gay or trans. I think that part of the problem in the Christian right is that, isn't it? Because they view gay people as in need of salvation. Any member of the LGBTQ community is in need of salvation, even if they don't know.
Here's where once again, it gets into, and I think we've been on this, we've been talking for a good
Yeah,
while now,
yeah.
and
We're probably not going to
maybe
get
we
to the
could,
theology part, but it
yeah,
doesn't
maybe
mind.
we can
Maybe
we
some
can
other time.
schedule another
Yeah.
time to talk about spirituality and theology
Spirituality,
as
theology.
it
Paul
as it
Tillich.
relates to,
I'm interested in Paul Tillich, actually. Yeah.
yeah, and Paul Tillich perhaps as well.
Yeah.
I'd be happy to do that with
Yeah.
you at another time. I mean, maybe just as a last word,
Yeah. Yeah.
um,
I didn't
what
realize this
is
topic was going to be so extensive, but yeah,
well, they're just sort of, you can go off in so many different directions and
true.
tangents with this.
Yeah.
The really the really difficult thing, and the thing that is frightening me these days, is the model of engagement with others that Trump is uh, is creating for the society. Um, I mean, he is normalizing dishonesty. He is normalizing disrespect. He
Yeah.
is normalizing um, almost normalizing vindictiveness. He is normalizing egoism and narcissism. Um, and to the extent that all that stuff becomes normalized, um, those are norms that are going to lead to the destruction of a society. You can't live, a society cannot live in a cohesive way with itself with such norms. Those norms are self-destructive norms.
Yeah.
And to the extent that we as a society, and this is going to be true for the right and for the left, it doesn't matter, to the extent that we can't find the alternative norm. This gets back, I guess, to the very beginning of our conversation, where we were talking about how Trump, in some sense, represents the diametric opposite
Of
of what
course.
Christ represents. And you can go right down the list and see him as the opposite. Um, in my view, the norms that would come out of a Christ-like uh, um, a Christ-like ethic um, are norms that would allow people, even with differences, to talk to one another. Their norms of honesty, their norms of tolerance, their norms of respect, their norms of mutual care, and so forth. That's what you need in order for people uh, to work with one another in a healthy way. And where those norms die, where those norms are even um, where the opposite of those norms become the standard, that's going to lead to the destruction of any society.
Yeah.
No society is going to be able to withstand that. Um, and that's what we're looking at right now. And I just pray
Yeah.
that people will wake up, and especially those who, for whatever reason, are enamored of Donald Trump, will come to recognize that he's junk food for the soul,
Yeah.
and and too much of him will destroy the fabric of our society, and
Yeah.
almost inevitably.
Yeah. He
And
lied
so,
indiscriminately. That's true. I mean, all politicians lie to a degree, but I think Donald Trump exceeds all that. And and because of him. we might lose trust in institutions, in the government itself, and I think that's very dangerous, isn't it?
Oh, very much so. I mean, I find myself wondering whether, are you going to be able to count on companies um, being true to their contractual obligations? If the norm becomes that you say anything to get what you want, and then you can violate that in any way because everybody is simply out for themselves without any sense of responsibility to anyone else. I mean, if that becomes the norm of society, society is going to implode.
Yeah.
Um, and So let's hope that we wake up before this all comes crashing down on our heads.
Yeah,
But
that's right.
Orlando, let's maybe we'll come up with a time to discuss the theology,
Yeah, definitely. We're not.
spirituality behind
Yeah,
all of this.
we didn't get round to that, but yeah, I look forward to it. And thank you so much for, talking about politics and what's going on in America and the world today,
Sure.
which is
Yeah.
definitely more
Yeah.
pressing. We should be discussing these issues and urging people to come to an agreement. Try to meet in the middle, maybe come up with some kind of centrism, not as a cop out, but in the words of Thomas Ferguson, just so both sides can find some kind of balance where, conservatives pull the reins of liberals and say, you need to slow down. And then the liberals also are able to say, look, you need to make some progressive moves. You need to move with the times. You need to upgrade your views, and stop being so scared of change. And that way both sides can work together
Yeah.
towards some
Well,
real progress. Yeah.
that's so important, and for us to each recognize the humanity of the other and really reflect upon what our fundamental commitments should
Yeah.
be and why. I just think that's so fundamentally important now.
Thank you
Anyway,
so
thank
much,
you,
Richard.
Orlando, for
No
making this
worries.
possible.
Until
Yeah,
next time.
yeah,
Nice one. Yeah, there's so much that me and Richard could have talked about in that exchange. I mean, we didn't get through everything that we wanted to say. Um, but yeah, I think there'll be another discussion in the future about what's going on in America in terms of politics. And we didn't get to discuss theology and Paul Tillich. We're definitely going to get onto that. And perhaps we'll also discuss Trump's infractions and crimes and what's going on with the Epstein files, for example. Is Trump trying to hide something? Um, Jeffrey's brother, Mark Epstein, seems to think so. I mean, he's gone on um, Piers Morgan Uncensored um, to say that uh, it seems like there is some kind of cover up that his brother was assassinated. There's evidence from the coroner that uh, his hyoid bone was broken, and that's consistent with strangulation, and that perhaps people are trying to hide something. Maybe the Epstein files implicates a lot of people, and yeah, and it's we could also talk about the Christian left and more about their views and the Christian on the left here in Britain as well, which was a faction of the Labour Party, and they were more um, socialist than anything else, and how socialism may never be allowed to take off in America because of McCarthyism. And there's so many different directions that we could possibly go into. Um, but yeah, we're going to aim to have a more structured conversation next time about politics, um, about identity. politics, which seems to be very prevalent in America and has rubbed off in countries like, the UK. And yeah, going to touch upon uh, other topics as well to do with spirituality and and how we could perhaps try to make amends in the political arena um, towards a more tolerable world, a world that thrives in happiness and where people come together and become more agreeable. And yeah, there's so much more to discuss. But anyway, thanks for listening, and until next time, thank you very much.